The right honourable gentleman mentions uncertainty. Well, the only people who are generating uncertainty in this place are the opposition. It is they who are selling this country short. They won't vote for a deal, they won't vote for no deal, and they won't vote for a general election. And as anyone who talks to British business knows, the main threat to our economy would come from the economic policies which we heard set out in Brighton last week. Now, as I set out in my opening remarks, the government's central position is that we are working to secure a good deal, and of course the focus of that is at the summit on the 17th and 18th of October. And that remains our overwhelming focus, that remains our best hope, and clearly it is not helped when the opposition come together to remove our negotiating leverage in those vital talks. Now, when it comes to the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, who the right honourable gentleman referenced in his remarks, I'm grateful to the member for Runnymede and Weybridge about all the work that he's done as Chancellor to help prepare for no deal. And of course, we've been able to build on that over the last few weeks. But I would note that when it comes to some of the more outlandish speculation in this area, that Francis Coppola in the Financial Times, in an article entitled "The Mythical Bets on a No-Deal Brexit," said yesterday that this is yet another tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. And frankly, I think that that is about the sum of the merit of this debate. Now, when it comes to individual positions, the government will not comment on those. You wouldn't expect us to. We're not going to comment on the actions of individuals. What I would say is that we do not accept that there is any prospect of a conflict of interest. And insofar as anyone needs standing up to, it's not my right honourable fellow Prime Minister. It is the right honourable gentleman who, frankly, I think is making a fairly political and, dare I say it, fairly speculative attempt to try and throw mud around the House this afternoon. Because I didn't hear anything in his statement or anything in his questions which amount to substantive points. They amount, frankly, to trying to propagate myth, to smear, and indeed, of course, in a week where we are trying to lower the temperature in the House, they seem intended to stoke it. So, from my point of view, I've nothing further to add.
Well done. Well done.
Amber Rudd.
Speaker, could I congratulate my honourable friend on his elevation to this important role? Well, many of us on this side of the House, and in fact across the House, are concerned about the impact on currency markets of the obvious contradiction in the Benn Act with the government's consistent position that we are leaving on October the 31st. Can I say that what unites everybody on this side of the House is the confidence that the real damage to this country would be done by the honourable party opposite, getting any place in government. Every time they make an announcement, that is what affects the markets. That is what gives further uncertainty to this country and would truly damage our economy.
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for that question. And of course, I entirely agree with her. The danger that we heard set out last week, the prospect, I thought a 3-day week was bad. Well, we decided to split the difference and have a 4-day week. Much of what we heard in Brighton was a recipe for business disaster, a recipe for the very damage which we need to avoid and which we spent the last 9 years trying to put right.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The pound charting is at a 2-year high in August, and we've seen the Prime Minister's sister, Rachel Johnson, saying people who have invested billions in shorting the pound are shorting the country in the expectations of a no-deal Brexit. The former Chancellor says there's only one outcome that works for them, a crash-out, no-deal Brexit that sends the currency tumbling and inflation soaring. And Francis Coppola, who he was keen to quote there, said that at the very least there is a conflict of interest here. The Prime Minister has at least £375,000 from donors associated from hedge funds during his leadership campaign. And we already know from the Jennifer Curie case that he is no stranger to conflicts of interest. So will he launch an investigation into this whole affair? Because the public need to know what is going on behind the scenes here. And will he accept that those who are already wealthy seem to have everything to gain from a no-deal Brexit, but my constituents and thousands of others across these islands are still struggling to make ends meet after a decade of austerity, and they have everything to lose?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. We obviously served together on the Treasury Select Committee. She speaks about her constituents. Well, my constituents in Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland could not by any metric be described as wealthy, and they enthusiastically support the idea of our delivering on our manifesto commitment and indeed on the referendum result to leave the European Union. When it comes to the issue about no deal, As I say, the government's position is very clear. We want a good deal, a fair deal, which doesn't leave this country as a rule-taker in perpetuity. And on that point, clearly, if we secure that deal, my point to the SNP will be very simply that if they want to avoid no deal, they should vote for the deal we bring back.
Tim Lawton.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate my honourable friend on his appearance at the dispatch box. And that limp excuse at an urgent question, doesn't it really reveal the contempt which the opposition hold for financial markets, which contribute 11% of tax revenue to the Exchequer? So does he agree with me that the fact that of the $6.6 trillion of currency dealing done globally, now 43% is done in the City of London, a record high, is a vote of confidence in the City and the way this government is handling it? And how far does he think the pound would fall if that lot ever got into power?
Minister.
Well, I think the pound would need a good head for height, Mr. Speaker, in that scenario, because the truth of the matter is that he's absolutely right. The City of London is, of course, one of the great assets of this country. It is something which we should celebrate rather than castigate. It is a source of enormous tax revenue which underpins our vital public services. And there is absolutely no doubt that it is one of the key cards in our hands when it comes to the Brexit negotiations and securing a good deal. And so I absolutely agree with him. We need to sometimes do more to talk it up rather than try and talk it down.
Sir Vincent Cable.
Isn't the implication of the Minister's first answer that the authorities will allow the currency to fall indefinitely without intervention if that is where the market leads?
Minister.
Well, the government's position is that we don't adopt a fixed target for sterling, and clearly we believe it's sensible for currency to find its own level in various circumstances. And obviously that freedom for the currency to float, I think, is important. And so, look, we all believe in our country in this House. We all believe that our country will succeed in a whole variety of scenarios, and I believe that sterling will find an appropriate level in any different scenario. And clearly there are aspects of a fall in sterling which allow exports to be easier to conduct. So it's not a zero-sum game. We have to trust the market to find its own level.
Sir Mike Penning.
Mr. Speaker, there's one obvious thing, even for people like me that are not economists, that if you talk down the country and talk down the economy, that's where the economy will go. And thank goodness the party opposite is not in power to actually destroy the economy.
Minister.
Well, this goes exactly to the point which I was making, which is that we do need a bit of self-belief in our country. And here we are, the world's fifth largest economy, a country which is widely regarded around the world as a bastion of strength, and we are absolutely going to succeed in all scenarios. And when it comes to Brexit, deal or no deal, as I say, the government's strong preference is that we should get a deal. But the overwhelming point that people need to hear from this dispatch box and from this government is that we are leaving the European Union on the 31st of October, delivering what people asked us to do, and indeed what most of us in this House were elected specifically on manifestos to deliver.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, The Guardian today is reporting that Crispin Odey is shorting house builders and shopping centres. What this means is that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, when they can't build homes and more shops closed, he will make a packet. Surely the Minister can see there's a massive conflict of interest, particularly for the Leader of the House, who's been financed by this man for years.
Well, the passion that the Honourable Lady shows is certainly a match. When I was in Bishop Auckland recently addressing some of her constituents, they were very clear that we should be leaving the European Union. And look, I've already said in my earlier answers that I do not propose to comment on the actions of individuals. Clearly, it is for them to account. The government does not take a position on the actions of individuals. We do not take a position on the issue of short selling.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister to his place? And does he agree with me that the surefire way of stopping speculators benefiting from a no-deal Brexit is for the Shadow Chancellor and his comrades to vote for the Prime Minister's deal when he brings it back and stop the no-deal in the first place?
Minister.
I do agree with my honourable friend, because clearly if we can secure a good deal, if we can secure a deal which is fair to this country, and that is our central aim, then that is what everyone in this House should get behind, because that will take our country out of the European Union on the smoothest basis. Well, the Honourable Lady says from a sedentary position fantasy. What I would say is fantasy is the idea that it improves our chances of securing a good deal if you keep propagating a surrender act. And this is the problem, which I'm afraid to say lies at the heart of this debate, which is that the opposition are in essence trying to take power without responsibility, and it is highly unfortunate, and it is detrimental to this country's interests if we do not all work together as a nation to deliver on what we decided as a country was our future course of action.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister confirm that the government's own economic assessment shows that a no-deal Brexit will have the most damaging consequences for the British economy, investment, jobs and businesses? And as that is the case, well, we've all read the assessment produced by the government. As that is the case, can he explain to the House why he is prepared to contemplate that outcome, given the impact it would have on British business?
Well, the right honourable gentleman makes a point which I think we have often debated in this House. And, of course, the answer is because we believe on this side of the House in delivering on the referendum mandate, which was to trigger Article 50 and to leave the European Union. And, obviously, the operation of Article 50 is very clear. You leave with a deal if you can secure it, but without a deal if you cannot. And the government, of course, is investing billions of pounds in no-deal preparation. Much of that money has been invested subsequent to the November 2018 report. And, of course, that report also didn't touch upon dynamic policy options which will be open to the government after we leave the European Union. I think in my own region, for example, of free ports. So the modelling is not perfect in that sense, and it doesn't encompass all the options which are open to us. Nonetheless, as I say, the base case, the working assumption that the government makes is that we will leave the European Union with a deal. That is what we are working towards. The crucial summit is now only 3 weeks away, and I think it would help if this House could get behind the government's efforts to try and secure a sensible deal, take us out and actually move the country forward, because this is the umpteenth debate, frankly, that we've had in this House over this issue. We go round in circles, we don't make progress, because one side of the House refuses to contemplate any sensible way out of this impasse.
I just very gently remind the House that the thrust of the urgent question relates to short positions being taken against the pound. This is not a general second reading style debate on the merits or demerits of a no-deal Brexit, of which the House has treated before and doubtless will do so again. It's on the specific matter to which I've just referred, and I feel sure that our honourable friend from the West Country is a noted authority upon this matter on which he's about to expatiate. Mr. Michael Tomlins.
Mr. Speaker, you're very kind, and how wonderful it is to see the Minister in his place, oozing calm and authority in sharp contrast to the stoking of fears and division that we have from the opposite benches. We've just heard about the risk to the economy, but isn't the real risk to the economy not Brexit, nor yet a no-deal Brexit? The real risk is letting the Shadow Chancellor anywhere near number 11 or the Treasury itself.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for those very kind remarks. It is clear that would be the ultimate vote of no confidence in the British economy.
Sammy Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister not find it ironic that the Shadow Chancellor should be concerned about the future value of the pound and the impact on speculation, when his party and he have spread economic gloom and doom, have talked the economy down and proposed lunatic economic policies if ever he should get his hands on the levers of power in this country? Would you agree with me that the real honeypot for speculators is not us leaving the EU, but the prospect of a Labour government?
I could not agree more strongly with the honourable gentleman, and the point is, of course, that yes, the danger is less our leaving the European Union; it's more the opposition entering Downing Street.
Mr. Andrew Jones.
Can I congratulate my honourable friend on his appointment? He's doing brilliantly for his first appearance of the dispatch box. He talked about bringing certainty to the markets by delivering Brexit. The main message I hear from constituents in Harrogate and Knaresborough is that after 3.5 years of talking, we've had enough talking. Why don't you just get on with it? Does he agree with them?
Yes.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, who of course was a very distinguished holder of this office himself, and he's absolutely right. There is, in all walks of life, a demerit to uncertainty, and there is a real problem now whereby we marched the country up to the top of the hill in the run-up to the 29th of March and then had to march down again. We're now very close to our projected exit date of the 31st of October. I think it would be really, really problematic for all of those businesses who are making their preparations, who are in some cases making a stockpiling provision as well, to keep going backward and forward on this question. The country voted to leave in 2016. It reaffirmed that by voting by over 80% for the two main parties who were committed to delivering on that result in 2017. We need to get on with the job, and actually there wouldn't be anything for people to speculate over if we could achieve certainty in this House.
Tracy Brabin.
Over the weekend, I watched The Big Short, and I would encourage everybody to watch that film about subprime mortgages. In that film, there were several hedge funders who made billions out of the collapse of the market. They didn't care that honest, ordinary Americans lost their homes and their jobs. So when this does happen, when we have a no-deal Brexit and there are hedge fund managers who make billions, can the Minister tell us how he's going to support my constituents who are going to be impoverished, maybe lose jobs, maybe lose their homes? What is he going to do to level the playing field? And actually, it's a question of morality.
Good question.
Well, I'm an historian rather than an economist, but I certainly don't take my lessons on hedge fund activity from Hollywood. What I would say is that we need to be very clear that there is a real need to provide certainty, and that certainty is hugely important. But I would gently, and this is gently, because I didn't vote for the deal the first two times that it came forward, and I did so because of the very reasons that my right honourable friend the Prime Minister didn't, which was the concerns about the backstop provisions, and those backstop provisions need to be addressed, and we are working to address them. But actually, fundamentally, we did vote to leave on a deal or no deal basis. Her constituents voted to leave the European Union. They were. I have never. And actually, the honourable gentleman says from a supplementary position, not with a no deal basis. Actually, I find my constituents are very clear that they voted to leave deal or no deal, and that was very clear at the time.
Ray McKinley.
Can I congratulate my honourable friend on his new position? He is truly doing sterling work this afternoon. It will come as no surprise to know that I am fully in favour of well-run and smooth capital markets, of which London is reaping an international reward. Would my honourable friend like to speculate on what sort of state of short-selling and sterling damage would be done should the party opposite, given their unfunded tax proposals, their potential sequestration of private assets, what the market would think of them if they were anywhere close to power, which I pray they do not.
Well, I thank my honourable friend very much for that question. He is absolutely right. I'm afraid we cannot get around the fact that we are now dealing with something very, very dangerous in terms of the divide between the two parties, between economic rationality and a programme which would well-nigh destroy the free market economy in this country. And they scoff and they sneer, but the reality is that anybody looking at the prognosis brought forward in the Labour conference last week, still less at their trillions of pounds of commitments which they are now adding up, and will see that it would not only destroy our public finances, it would also do massive damage to the competitiveness of British business upon which jobs and homes and mortgages depend.
Hear, hear. Chris Leslie.
To accept the specific conclusions in the Office for Budget Responsibility Fiscal Risks report, where they ran a stress test on a no-deal scenario just in July on the IMF's model. They predicted that sterling could depreciate by 10% immediately because, quote, market participants judge that a fall in the pound is needed to compensate for the reduced competitiveness with the EU, meaning that, quote, inflation is initially higher due to the weaker pound, contributing to the UK entering a year-long recession. Yep. Does he accept the OBR's analysis of that, or does he just believe this is a price worth paying?
Minister.
Well, what I would say is I believe that we can avoid that scenario entirely if we actually get a good deal and leave the European Union to plan on the 31st of October. But look, in a scenario whereby we cannot get a deal through this House, then we are very clear that we are going to deliver on the referendum mandate and leave the European Union, and that is uncontested government policy, and we will make certain that we make the dynamic policy choices to make sure that our economy remains strong, robust and full of opportunity.
William Ragg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my honourable friend care to comment on the splendid irony of Mr. George Soros, who in 1992 made a fortune in short positions against the pound and is now one of the bankrollers of the Continuity Remain campaign?
Tempting as it is to follow the trail laid down by my honourable friend, I will content myself by saying that I wouldn't comment on the actions of individuals in my reply to the opposition. I won't comment on the actions of individuals now. But clearly, the idea that there are vested interests on only one side of the debate is very much something which could be contested.
Catherine West.
Mr. Speaker, one of the areas of the economy which the casino-style hedge funds will be betting against is the housing market. What assessment has the Treasury made of how many fewer homes will be built and which section of the house building economy which will be worse affected? Is it the renters? Is it the first-time buyers? Is it the pensioners? Which section of the economy will be the worst affected?
All of it.
To the best of my knowledge, we haven't commissioned specialist advice on the housing market, although if I'm incorrect in that, I will get a written answer to the honourable lady setting that out. But it is very clear that the UK housing market is in its most robust condition for many, many years. Indeed, we are now building many multiples of the situation we inherited in 2009, when house building had well-nigh stagnated. And, of course, many of the problems we face in our housing market stem from the disastrous failure of the last Labour government to build enough homes in the first place.
Luke Graham.
Mr. Speaker, uncertainty hits not only London markets but markets in Edinburgh and elsewhere across the United Kingdom. Will my honourable friend agree with me the best way to end this uncertainty is to vote for a deal, as he did back in March?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. And yes, I did vote for a deal on the 29th of March, and I did so because I feared losing Brexit altogether. And I think that was a real risk at that point, and it remains a real risk now, thanks to the antics of the opposition. But if only, frankly, all of Scotland was well represented, as they are, by the Scottish Conservatives, who, of course, have adopted a totally sensible and unifying position, which is that we should get on and deliver, as one country, what our one country voted to do.
Hannah Bardell.
Much, Mr. Speaker. The economies of the UK were damaged almost irreparably by SPIVs and speculators in 2008. Has the Government and the Prime Minister learned nothing from that experience, which hit the poorest in our society the worst? This is not about whose policy position is best or worst. This is about transparency, about honesty, and about Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister's relationships with these short-changers to society. So will he not recognise the seriousness of this matter and call an independent investigation into the Prime Minister's conduct?
Minister.
What this actually is about democracy and about whether we implement the result of a national referendum in which over 34 million of our fellow citizens expressed their view. And I, for my part, intend to honour what they voted for. That is the position of this government. That is the position which I think anybody who understands the damage that preventing our leaving the European Union would do to faith in democracy would adopt.
Adam Afria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend's doing a great job on the front bench. He's very much welcome. But it does strike me, this quite urgent question is deeply partisan and political, and I think we all know that. But it does strike me that our economic growth is looking pretty good this year, and PwC predicts pretty good economic growth. But I wonder, just to kind of negate some of the nonsense coming from the opposition benches, can you tell me how well things are going for a no-deal preparation? For a no-deal exit?
Well, My honourable friend is absolutely right to say that actually the third quarter figures for the UK economy now look very robust, and clearly there is a lot to be said for the work that is ongoing in terms of making sure that we are ready in a deal or no deal scenario. And in the spending review earlier this month, my right honourable friend the Chancellor, who is giving an excellent speech today in Manchester, no thanks to the opposition, will be setting out our plans for how we move forward. But clearly we are deploying billions of pounds. We are now making sure that there are the most robust available plans to make sure that we are ready to thrive in all scenarios.
Sir Edward Davey.
When the last Conservative Chancellor, a former Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, and the Prime Minister's own sister blow the whistle, the Minister simply cannot brush aside these most serious claims of a conflict of interest. Some of the Prime Minister's biggest donors are clearly betting against Britain. And intentionally or not, the Prime Minister is aiding and abetting them by pursuing a no-deal Brexit. So I ask again, Mr. Speaker, will the government set up an urgent independent investigation?
Minister.
No.
Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that speculation in the future movements of markets or currencies, some people thinking it will go up, some people thinking it will get down, is a sign of a healthy free market economy, and that there's no speculation in the direction of travel of the Shadow Chancellor's favoured economic model in Venezuela, where the Bolivar continues to crash, which is hardly surprising because inflation's running at about 1 million% this year?
Well, my honourable friend puts it with his customary robustness, but he is absolutely right that in the end the real threat to the economy, the real threat to the strength of sterling, the real threat to our competitiveness, the real threat to jobs and living standards across this country would be a series of bad decisions made by a reckless, hard-left Labour government.
Jenny Chapman.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents and the ministers are working multiple jobs, long hours, to keep themselves afloat. Does he understand at all just how distasteful it is to them to see people making millions betting against our country?
Minister.
Well, I yield to nobody in my appreciation of how hard people in the Tees Valley work and indeed how passionate they are about our area. But look, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that democracy needs to be honoured. We need to deliver on the referendum result and to get this done. And when it comes to the actions of the city, there won't be any actions that they can take if we get a good deal across the line and the honourable lady votes for it.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In June, the Bank of England reported that thanks to the mitigation and preparation put in place by the government, any hit to GDP would be reduced by 2.5% in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Can the Minister, who I welcome to his position, confirm that since then we've had more preparation, which means that we should be further protected, meaning that these individuals will not make their money?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comments. And he is, of course, absolutely right that we are indeed stepping up our preparation to cover all eventualities. That's why we made the provision that we did in the spending review, which was absolutely designed to ensure that we go into this autumn with all the options that are open to us kept as wide as possible. It's also why, of course, the provisions of the Surrender Act, which the opposition have brought forward against the will of this government, are so unwise.
Sangham Debonair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister not understand that my constituents in Bristol West are smart enough to spot the hypocrisy of members on the Treasury bench telling us that we should vote for a deal when A, none exists, and B, they didn't last time? Does he not understand that they can also spot the other hypocrisy of criticising people for making uncosted spending assessments mere hours after the Secretary of State for Health said he didn't know how he was going to pay for all these hospitals he's promised us? Does he not understand that my constituents can spot all of this?
I struggle to see what all of that necessarily had to do with the terms of the question which brought us to the House today. But what is very clear, I believe, is that most people in Bristol would also be smart enough to spot that it would be thoroughly unwise to ignore the result of a democratic referendum.
Patrick Grady.
Mr. Speaker, the best way to stop the speculation and the uncertainty is for the government to accept that there is a majority in this House that will not let a no deal happen, and therefore, if the House does not agree a deal, we will not, in fact, be leaving on the 31st of October.
All I would say to the honourable gentleman is watch this space.
Cat Smith.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. In response to an earlier answer, the Minister said he was more of a historian than an economist, so he might remember that hedge funds were also reported to have taken short positions against the pound in 2016 during the referendum. So is the Minister satisfied that regulation of short selling in hedge funds is adequate?
Well said.
Well, as I said in my opening remarks in the statement, the Treasury keeps these issues under review, and work always goes on to make sure that we regulate this area in a way that's appropriate and proportionate.
David Linden.
Mr. Speaker, in the interests of transparency, will the Minister agree to publish details of all call logs and meetings with every Minister in the Government with Crispin Odey?
The Government doesn't comment on meetings with individuals, and you wouldn't expect me to at this point.
Ian Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the reason that the Shadow Chancellor is peddling conspiracy theories about shadowy figures, working with the government, manipulating the economy for personal gain, because he's a self-proclaimed Marxist who wants to undermine trust and confidence, and it's no laughing matter, who wants to undermine trust and confidence in the way our economy and our country works. That's what he's trying to do. And there have been, in fact, two investigations into these wild claims already. One, as we heard earlier, by the FT, which said this is firmly in the realm of conspiracy theories, and the second by the independent fact-checking organisation Full Fact, which demolished this crazed nonsense in an article headlined, "We think there's a big error in that viral article about hedge funds and Brexit."
Well, would that all parts of our country were as well served as Dudley is by the honourable gentleman, because he is, of course, absolutely right. It is genuinely dispiriting that in the Mother of Parliaments we find ourselves debating material which is more fit to the tinfoil hat brigade than it is for Parliament at a crucial time in our country's history.
Jack Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, as Deputy General Secretary of the old Transport and General and then Unite, I led the battle against the Kraft takeover of Cadbury's. A successful and profitable British icon was taken over by a debt-laden American multinational because the hedge funds bought 31% of the shares and sold Cadbury's short. Does the Minister not recognise that there is a potential conflict of interest when you have a Prime Minister prepared to sell Britain short by way of a no-deal Brexit, backed by those who make billions daily out of selling our nation short?
Well, the short-selling regulations cover the sale of shares, and so that falls within the remit of the existing legislation. What I would say clearly is that we all want to see our country thrive, we all want to see our country move forward towards a better future, and that will be best done by voting for a deal, which of course many of the members of his former trade union will of course have done so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do hope the Minister actually recognises that we are not talking about companies protecting themselves in good faith from the devastating impact of a no-deal Brexit, but about large-scale industrial shorting of the pound, and that can drive extreme behaviours as well as market crashes, and that at the very least it needs to be investigated by the Electoral Commission to see what the influence is. But my question to him is very, very simple. Does he know the level of exposure to the shorting of the pound?
And the government doesn't take a view on this issue. But look, what is absolutely clear here is that the honourable lady can avoid the outcome which she so wants to avoid by voting for a deal when one is brought forward. And that is absolutely and always remains the case. So what we need now is to move forward with some purpose rather than with wild speculation, trying to smear the government as somehow being in hock to these interests. It's not working. Any rational observer will see that this is not an argument which sustains itself.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister keeps trying to make this about leaving the EU on 31st October or not. This is all about
transparency and conflict of interest. We're talking about hedge fund managers who previously backed the Leave campaign in 2016 after a referendum made something like £350 million overnight. So therefore £375,000 backing to the Prime Minister is nothing compared to the billions of pounds these people might make if there's a no-deal crash-out. Surely understands it's about transparency. This conflict of interest. He's so confident about the behaviour of the government. Why doesn't he authorise an investigation?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman needs to recognise that our country is absolutely determined to leave the European Union on the 31st of October, and rather than trying to prevent that, and of course in so doing making no deal more likely, he should get behind the government's efforts to secure a good deal.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to put some context on these figures. Correct me if I'm wrong, but back in 2016, OD Fund Management made £300 million on shorting sterling. By contrast, the UK automotive industry have spent £350 million in ensuring they are protected against a no-deal Brexit. Does the Minister not recognise that we are vulnerable in our manufacturing sector, in our heartland communities, to losing jobs, losing businesses because of the practices of these short sellers? And if I may just quote Lord Macpherson, former Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, who tweeted, "Mr Hammond is right to question the political connections of some of the hedge funds with a financial interest in no deal. They are shorting the pound and the country, with the British people the main loser." What does the Minister say?
Minister.
Well, I would point out the wise words of the Opposition Deputy Chief Whip in the House of Lords last November, where he said, "Short selling is not necessarily the evil practice the popular press held it to be. It has a role."
Christian Matheson.
Mr. Speaker, it may have a role, but not when government policy deliberately manipulates the currency to provide a big payout to individuals who have paid huge amounts of money to either the Conservative Party or to those individual right honourable members. That's the problem. Does the Minister not understand this is not about the government taking a position on currencies? It's about the stink of something that doesn't seem quite right.
That is such an unworthy question. I don't intend to dignify it with an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister quotes Frances Coppola, but she's also said many hedge fund managers see Brexit as an opportunity from which they obviously hope to profit, and they are positioning their portfolios accordingly. She fears this creates psychological pressure on the Prime Minister to deliver what his backers want, not what is best for the country. And that's what she said. So how can the Minister convince the people of the UK that the Prime Minister has the moral courage to resist this psychological pressure?
The Prime Minister has the moral courage to deliver on the referendum result, take our country forward, deliver what millions of people voted for, and make our country a better place to live. If we're going to exchange quotes from this article, let me just quote a bit more. In short, there is no evidence that these hedge funds that have backed Johnson's election campaigns have millions of pounds of speculative bets on a no-deal Brexit. They have millions of pounds of speculative bets on UK companies, yes, but that is simply business as usual.
Mary McCarthy.
The reason why this isn't business as usual is because we are faced with government ministers that have very close connections and financial interests in some of these speculative funds that are faced making a decision which would have catastrophic consequences for my constituents and the businesses in my constituency, and there is no transparency as to the closeness of that relationship. It is not something that can be divorced from what is going on in this place, and that is why the Minister needs to agree to request for an inquiry. We need to get to the bottom of this.
The government is doing what it's doing because we believe it is right to leave the European Union on the 31st of October, as we all promised we would do. And that is absolutely what animates our actions. Any suggestion to the contrary is not just wrong, it's offensive.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How does a minister defend a situation where anyone who's caught insider gambling to deliberately fix the result of a game of cricket goes to jail, but anyone who's insider gambling to deliberately crash the economy is likely to end up in the House of Lords?
That's a very serious suggestion. I wouldn't recommend the honourable gentleman repeats it outside this chamber.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome the new Minister to his place. But
can I just clarify the earlier statement the Minister made that the former Chancellor is part of the tinfoil hat brigade perpetuating a conspiracy theory in regard to this very serious matter?
I have a great deal of admiration for the former Chancellor, but I'm very clear that in this case he is wrong.
Bill Esterson. A number of hedge funds expect to benefit as a result of their short positions on a number of sectors in the economy, including construction and shopping centres. It cannot be right that as a result of a deliberate result of government policy, these hedge funds are going to cash in at the expense not just of those sectors, but of the constituents of every single member of this House.
Minister. Government policy is to leave the European Union with a deal, if at all possible, and that remains our central case. And that question in many ways summarises the whole of the last few minutes, insofar as it doesn't get to the point that substantively the only reason we are at risk of a no-deal exit is because we haven't managed to persuade the opposition that they should get behind our attempts to secure a better deal rather